All right. Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock on Wednesday, time for the Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University and the director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center and also faculty affiliate with Iowa Learning Farms. So it's my great pleasure to get to help with moderating the webinars, and it's really exciting to introduce our speaker today that is sadly for us at Cornell University now, but did I say that wrong? It's noon on Wednesday. Yeah, but Wendong was at Iowa State University in the Department of Economics and with the Center for Ag and Rural Development CARD. And so he's going to talk to us today about decoding Iowa farmers' understanding of edge of field practices. So I'm really excited to hear from Wendong today about this. I think some of this is INRC funded work, so that's really exciting as well. So Wendong, the virtual floor is all yours.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt. And I want to show you guys first, if you pay attention to the thumbnail, I still have way more Iowa State attire than Cornell ones. And great to be here. And it's always a wonderful experience to talk with you guys. And this is a joint work, as Matt mentioned. This is generally funded by Iowa Nutrient Research Center and Leopold Center as well. And this is joint with Jackie Comito at the Iowa Learning Farms, as well as the Xiaolan Wan, who is a PhD student at ISU Econ Department. And so to start that, I think this is a general instruction on if you watch this webinar live for CEU, and these are the instructions that you need to contact to get your certificates. Regarding what I do, I think I still a significant portion of my portfolio, both in terms of research and extension, is related to the theme, sort of the interplay between ag and the environment. And I approach this from both angles. We want to understand farmer decision-making at the same time, which includes conservation practice adoption for cover crops, but also edge of field practice adoption. In addition, that we also try to quantify if there are nutrient reduction, what are the societal and private returns benefit from that. So we have done several studies joined with my colleague Cassie Kling and others to look into how the general public in Iowa and other places values the water quality improvements through reduction in nutrient runoff. So here is some of the examples of the stuff that we do. And the most relevant one for today's talk is on the right. It's a new policy brief that Jackie Xiaolan and I have published through CARD and also on Iowa Learning Farms. A lot of the slides actually are sort of snippets from that policy brief. If you pay attention to, this is related to the message that we talk about today. If you pay attention to the typical fact sheets or policy brief that CARD and other places put out, it's typically much, much longer and has a lot more text and less pictures. And this is thanks to Jackie's and Iowa Learning Farms team. And we have a much more graphical oriented and more user-friendly version for you to digest, and hopefully you will learn something. And in addition, that I have also done the second time the Iowa Farmland Ownership and Tenure Survey for 2022. If you don't know, this is a unique data collection that only exists in Iowa. So every 5 years since the 1980s, that Iowa State has a legislative mandate to do the survey to understand the ownership, tenure, and transition of farmland. And in 2017, we added questions about cover crop. In 2022, we also added some questions about edge of field studies as well. So I encourage you to check that out. In general, that we find, for example, this is a statistically representative survey based on aerial samples, that the cover crop adoption acreage from this survey in Iowa is about 7%, as opposed to if you use the often the farmer survey, then you get a much higher, probably higher than realistic numbers. Joined with my colleague at the Iowa State Econ Department, Hongli Feng, we also have looked into equip practices and examined what are some of the practices that only are beneficial for carbon sequestration, what are some of the practices are mainly related to nutrient reduction, which are sort of supports both. And so there are some interesting works there as well. But for today, we're going to talk about agile field practices, EOF. So if you pay attention to the webinar series and read the nice work coming out from Iowa State and Purdue and other places, that we are paying a lot of attention to conservation practices, both incentivized through federal and state level programs like EQIP or CSP or IDOLS program on working land practices such as no-till, cover crops, and split nitrogen and other things, but we actually know very little about agile field practices that we will focus about in our study today. But just so you know, my colleague Alejandro Plastina used the 2022 and 2017 new Ag Census data and compared the rate of adoption in cover crops as a county level in I states. And if you're seeing a blue color, that means according to the USDA statistics, seems to be some deceleration or disadoption of cover crops. So the share of the cropland now planting cover crops in these blue counties are actually less in 2022 compared to 2017. I think there are some slight changes in the wording of the questions, but this is a general information. I just want to show you that if you want to understand more about working land practices, there are a lot more data points. But in contrast, if you're looking at agile field practices, the three things we are focusing on today is saturated buffers, bioreactors, and constructed wetlands or water quality enhancement wetlands. So they are typically on the edge of the fields. And what they do is in many cases, they are relying on the connection with the tile drainage and diverting these nutrient runoff to these either perennial vegetation along the fields so that you can, before you go to the stream or ditch, then you go through these cleaning through saturated buffers, or you have the wood chips through the bioreactors, or you go to a large shallow water pool surrounded by vegetation in the water quality enhancement wetlands. By comparison, we know very little about the determinants and what drives farmers and landowners' decisions in adopting this. And this has more additional level of complexity because if you are thinking about these structural changes, the producer cannot make the decisions themselves as well. So why this matters is if we are thinking about the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy that Matt was leading, and one of the science findings is if you're looking at cover crops, for example, the nutrient reduction effects are actually quite variable. You don't necessarily, you see a high mean, but the variation is very big. But when you're looking at agile fields, they have shown more consistent reduction in terms of nutrient runoffs, and because they're sort of engineering solutions that they have more connection with the tile drain, so you have more predictability in terms of potential nutrient reduction and water quality improvements. And both at the federal and state level, we are making a lot more investment to incentivize saturated buffers. And if you're looking at Minnesota, for example, they have a buffer law, and IDOLS is also making a lot of investment in these practices. In central Iowa, for example, there are a lot of incentive that even pays beyond the 100% of the construction cost. So what we are trying to do another reason why we're paying attention to these is if we're looking at the actual adoption, cover crops is fairly low. And when compared to agile field practices, the agile field practice adoption rate is even lower. So far, based on our understanding that there are about 130 saturated buffers on bioreactors across the state. There are a lot more being incentivized, especially through IDOS, to be constructed there. And we have 129 wetlands that is geared towards water quality enhancements as well. So overall, that if you're looking at that, we have 30 million acres and about 25 million acres devoted to corn and soybeans. And a lot of the conservation, the scale of the conservation adoption for agile field practices is still relatively low. So I forgot to mention, if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to let me know. I'm happy to answer questions throughout. But what we do is we try to understand what are some of the factors that potentially can enhance and change the attitudes or nudge the farmers to adopt more of the agile field practices, right? So what we have done is we've done 2 rounds of farmer surveys, and we are also having additional funding from INRC to further hone in on the research question related to agile field practice adoption, related to who are the messengers who are telling you about these information, about these practices. And we are, so we are also working this year to do a CERT survey as well. But today I'm going to talk about the 2 rounds of the farmer survey that we have done. The first round was in August. It's an online only survey, and we sent to about a little over 4,000 farmers, and we got pretty good response rate. So 16% for the online survey. So typically you expect maybe 10% response rate for the online only. And in June 2023, last year, we did another mixed mode survey. We got additional 360 responses. And we'll tell you a little bit more about why we do these 2 rounds of the survey, because that through this, we discovered that the farmers through the first round didn't quite understand certain concepts. So we added more description of what exactly will mean for certain agile field practices. These are the 5 HUC 8 watersheds we selected. So what we do is we selected these North Raccoon, Boone, Winnebago, Turkey, and Middle Cedar sub-watersheds. And we not only surveyed the counties within those, but also the surrounding counties in these watersheds as well. So we are targeting essentially large corn or soybean farmers and potentially landowners in these watersheds who own at least 100 acres of cropland. Right? And so who are the farmers and landowners in these 2 rounds? Their farm size, on average, in the first round is about 600 acres. So they're pretty generally large farms. And in the second round is also about 280 acres as well. This is also, that shows you about 60% of the farms has a creek. 95% has tile drainage. This is northern Iowa, right? So you're thinking about the tile drainage, which also highlights the importance and the potential salience of the agile field practices, which allows you to essentially quantify and divert the nutrients that is flowing within the tiles. And many of the farmers who participate in our surveys already participate in conservation programs, that about over half actually participate in CRP already, right? So CRP is Conservation Reserve Program. This is the USDA Land Retirement Program that's saying that you sign a contract, so you convert a portion of your cropland to grassland or forest. And so regarding what the demographics and the social economic characteristics, our farmers are a little older compared to the general average producer age from the 2022 Ag Census. So the producer age is closer to 60. In our survey, it's about 65. And this also includes potential landowners as well. So the landowner age are higher. So 80% of the male, and so about a third of the farmers reported household income over 200,000, total farm income over 250,000, and 10% are retired. And we also have information about the risk attitudes as well. So the idea is that if you're more risk averse, then you potentially would want to wait longer in terms of the newer technologies, such as the agile field practices. So any questions so far regarding why we are doing this, and what is the data, what is the nature, before I get on and show you some of the snippets of the key findings so far?
No, we'll save the questions for the end, I think, Wendong.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. So the first question is that I mentioned, if you're thinking about the agile field practices if we are doing for the 2 rounds, the first round is when we are asking the question, we ask, do you currently use these following conservation practices on any Iowa farmland you own or operate, right? So we just wrote down these terms, as I mentioned, saturated buffers, water quality enhancement, wetlands, or controlled drainage. What we discovered is if you pay attention to the first red circle in the round 1 in column 1, 13% of the respondents said they had saturated buffers, and 12% of the respondents said they have water quality enhancement wetlands. And we know that can't be true because I showed you the actual adoption is very, very low. So we were suspecting that people are potentially thinking the buffer strip, for example, or vegetative buffers are mistaken as saturated buffers, or any wetlands that they saw or a pothole that they also are thinking this is a water quality enhancement wetlands. So what we do in the second round is we add these descriptions with help from IDAL's Soil and Water Conservation Service and through the Iowa Learning Farms. So we added more descriptions in the round 2. So in addition to talk about saturated buffer only, we explain in the survey that saturated buffers means that this water is diverted into distribution pipe, which slowly flows through the soil vegetative buffers. Similarly for the wetland enhancement, and this is that we specifically added questions that these wetlands are designed specifically to improve water quality. Similarly for controlled drainage as well. And if you're looking at the second red box here in round 2, we get the percent of people who are reporting that they have saturated buffers and wetland enhancement restrictions are significantly lower, and the percent reporting controlled drainage dropped from 23% to 12% as well, right? So when you are, so this is the first surprise to us is that we definitely need to pay attention to, especially these newer practices that these may not be as familiar to farmers and landowners. They're unfamiliar with this. And when you are thinking about how do we describe what these practices are, and just saying this is a buffer, and people may thinking about a different kind of thing. Or when you're talking about saturated buffers, people may not be thinking about the specific practice that the educators or the researchers have in mind. And so I think there's potentially more necessity and for increased awareness and education. And when you are also showing this and having earlier, as we mentioned, having these pictures and to exploit, to also potentially even show the one that is the buffer strip, but it's not the saturated buffer, could potentially help people understand what you are really talking about. So that's the first one. It's worth in a name. And the second part is we ask several questions from the farmers and landowners about what do they think are the perceived environmental benefits of these practices. Because I mentioned that there are scientific studies which can quantify how these practices could potentially improve and impact water quality or soil health or other things. But we want to know the attitudes of the farmers and landowners because we are not sure, because these, as you see, these are the relatively new practices. The earlier research, especially looking at working land practices, is if people think these practices can deliver these effects, if the farmers or the producers think cover crop can successfully reduce nutrient reduction, that seems to be positively correlated with their later on adoption behavior. So people have to believe in essentially what you see. And what we find, again, that there are a lot of still unfamiliarity with these potential benefits of attribute practices. So I highlighted several questions. One is benefits. Whether do you think the following practices are beneficial for the environment? Whether this improves soil health, whether this reduces nitrogen in water bodies. So the three boxes I highlighted are both in the middle. So these are the neutral and not sure, right? So even for reducing nitrogen in water bodies, and Matt's modeling and other people's modeling and Tom Eisenhardt's works have already shown that this has been very effective, which is that the percent of the agree is more than half the respondents, but still that close to half or more than a third of the people are not sure about these benefits, and this uncertainty and unfamiliarity increase when you are looking at the impacts of soil health or whether this is broadly beneficial for the environment, right? So there's still a lot of expressed uncertainty or general unfamiliarity about the potential environmental benefits. There's a confusion about especially about the saturated buffers and wetland as opposed to bioreactor, for example, right? So if you're thinking about that, whether there are information about the across the board, so whether the bioreactor is beneficial for the environment, 51% said neutral, and it's more than significantly more than water quality enhancement wetlands, because there's also perceived wildlife benefits to the wetlands as well, right? So there is still a lot of confusion and uncertainty regarding how and whether these practices can deliver for the environment. And so that's one of the consistent messages that we saw through both rounds of the survey as well, right? So we also have looked into what are some of the potential barriers for adoption, right? And I want to highlight two things. One is this is showing you, I'm not familiar, so to what degree you agree with the statement, I'm not familiar with the following practice. If you see agree or strongly agree, that means that the farmers are expressing that they are not very familiar with these practices. And in both occasions, they're like over 50% or close to 50%. And many people who are not sure are also showing up in the round two as well. So another perspective, if we look at the percent of the people who think they're familiar with these practices, they're less than 30%, right? And another thing that if you're another element of this is the barriers and potential restrictions and the paperwork related to government programs. that fund these programs, right? So many people, so if you're looking at the first two columns, for example, the people who think they don't necessarily view the restriction or the requirements are burdensome, and those are less than 10%. In the contrast, many people are not familiar with all the restrictions or the requirements related to those. And for people who paid more attention to these, that many people are still thinking about there are still many restrictions and paperwork related to the adoption as well, right? So far I've talked about some of the qualitative element of the survey that the overall the farmers and landowners have a lesser understanding of these agile field practices compared to, for example, more familiar practices like cover crop. And another thing to enhance these element is we were thinking that what if we provide more information explaining about what these practices about and what this can do, and how does this potentially can whether this can impact their adoption attitudes, and to what extent, what message venues would be most effective, right? So that's one of the things we do. So recognizing these information gaps, we designed information treatment. And Matt has graciously helped us in recording the extension professional videos. What we do is we have designed these different arms of informations that either the farmers or landowners see graphical fact sheets on the left, like as you see on the very left. So saturated buffers with the colors and showing you saturated buffers decrease nitrogen by 53% on average. And we also have these waterfowl and perennial vegetation green figures here to show you there potentially can be wildlife benefits as well. And so this is the graphical fact sheets is one treatment versus extension professionals delivering the similar messages, but in a video fashion, versus early farmer adopter delivering the similar message in a video as well. So there's more detail about the text, for example, the maths as the extension professional talk about, IO farmers have several agile field options, and so how does these actually work? And so again, so this is the micromobial activity and plant uptake reduce the amount of the nitrogen going to surface water by average of 53%. So those are sort of the similar messages that you see in the graphical fact sheets. And at the bottom, Wade Dooley, the early farmer adopter, have talked about the experience from more of on the farm element, right? So the farmer element, and I had suitable land down the river, and so talking about the potential adoption with idols. So what we're finding, our hypothesis originally was that because we live in a TikTok era, we thought, video might be more effective. But what we find is actually the fact sheets are the most salient arm and the most wonderful one. And to our dismay, that Matt's video actually didn't help as much. One of the things we were discussing is that I think if Matt introduced himself as grew up on a farm in southern Iowa, that probably will even relate more to the farmers. So the words matters and how you present yourself matters. But in general, what you find is that here is on the y-axis, these are the uptake rate of these practices given different information. What you want to see is all the red, green, and orange bars are higher than the blue bar. The blue bar is control. There's no information treatment. So essentially, we just tell them, do you want to adopt saturated buffers or not? Then we have no information. You don't see any fact sheets or videos compared to seeing a fact sheet compared to seeing a farmer video compared to seeing an extension professional video, what we find is that for farmers who are not participating in CRP, all the three treatment works. So the blue bar is lower, but for people who are already enrolled in CRP, that they are less. So the information treatment didn't induce additional adoption willingness. And we also find that the red bar consistently ranks higher, followed by the farmer video. So the graphical fact sheets actually are better. And if you pay attention, one of the things we're currently doing is that if you think about your traditional extension fact sheets, it's often text heavy. So it's not as graphical and nicely laid out as this we presented here before. So in the current round, we're actually comparing the effectiveness of more traditional text-heavy fact sheets versus the one that Jackie's team at Iowa Learning Farms have created more graphical. So that's the main finding. The key takeaway is educational programs or the information treatment seems to be most effective for people who are not enrolled in CRP in this case, who are less familiar with these programs. And what we find is the infographic seems to be outperforming the videos, especially that even within the videos that we find seems to be that the early farmer adopter video seems to be more effective than extension professional ones, which is consistent with the literature. I will wrap up, and we have round 2 of the survey where we added new element in light of the effectiveness of the graphical designer. What we chose is we're not doing videos. Instead, we're comparing baseline fact sheets, traditional fact sheets, and with graphical fact sheets, and also infographics with male farmer versus female farmer, right? So what we find currently, if we're comparing these the fact sheets with male farmer and female farmer, we still find on average, again, you want the red and green bar to be higher than the blue bar, so it's relative to the control that you have more effectiveness. But in general, if you find that it's still fine, then for these information treatment are significantly meaningful for non-CRP participant, especially coming from a male messenger. So we're still working to figure out that how do we further test the messenger effects, who are the messengers and what are the messages. So early on, for example, I mentioned in this practice that we also did versions of the graphical fact sheets that only talk about water quality without wildlife benefits as well. But so there are some ongoing research, and we're going to do another round of survey. So any feedback and suggestion will be greatly appreciated. So with that, I will close. And the final thoughts: the agile field practices matter a lot. Currently, we see relatively low adoption levels, and one part of the puzzle is that the farmers and landowners are very unfamiliar with them. And I think we need to devote more efforts to figure out what are some of the messages in delivered in what way, by whom, are the most effective ones. And I think that given the significance and the potential gains coming from these practices, these could be beneficial, and especially that when all the private money is thinking about carbon credits and cover crops only, and this gives you another complementary view of thinking about how do we contribute to the nutrient reduction issues. I want to again thank INRC Leopold Center and IDOS for the financial support, and thanks to my collaborators Xiaolan and Jackie for the hard work. You have I think this
I
is
can do this.
for you. Okay,
I
great.
can do this, Wendong. So if you watch this webinar live and you're willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we'd really appreciate it. You can go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey or scan the QR code. Only one response for webinars in 2024 is needed, but we'd greatly appreciate it if you're willing to do that. Then, as Wendong said before, if you are on and need a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW @iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, ALENAW @iastate.edu. And Wendong, if you can move ahead in slides.
Right. Oh, sorry.
We might be, okay, yeah. All right, next week, our colleagues from the University of Iowa, Matthew Streeter and Keith Schilling are gonna talk about some work they've done looking at using delta sediments and pool levels to increase nitrate nitrogen load reductions at Lake Red Rock. Okay, feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. Oh yeah, again, this webinar will be archived at the iowalearningfarms.org/webinars location, or we now are on YouTube with the webinars, so you can find them there. Okay, we have gotten a few questions that have come in. The first one, any ideas why that round 2 farm size was significantly smaller?
That's a good question. I think that one of the it could be with the survey mode, but we need to look more into that to see what are some of the outliers. So there are substantial. We also have less respondents. So I will drop that down and pay attention. So this is the mean. I need to look into median to see whether some of the mean statistics in round 1, whether this is distorted by some outliers.
Okay. Yeah, and there was one person that asked if the difference in the 2 rounds might be impacted by the different sample sizes. I guess 360 to 650 or 3.
Yep.
There was a question about if these edge of field practices can be used in existing drainage systems and or implemented with only new systems. I can answer that one. They could be used in existing. They could be used with existing systems. And Jackie responded that the response rate was actually higher in the second round. I think maybe. So maybe there were fewer. But yeah, that's right.
Right. So the response rate is higher, but it's the respondents are fewer. I was more worried about this large standard deviation. So there seems to be potentially some outliers. We need to look into that more. Yep.
Okay. So yeah, and somebody did ask if each round the surveys went to the same people, but does each round of surveys go to the same people?
I don't think so. We don't know for sure because the IRB don't allow us to track that. So after the round 1 survey, so this is in collaboration with Center for Service Statistical Methodology. So after the round 1 survey, we get the sort of the participant ID, but we don't know yeah, so I don't know for sure, but these are the sample are large enough, as I mentioned, that in these 5 counties there are over 4,000 is in the sample. So we only got a total of 1,000. So there's very unlikely, but it could be.
A couple other questions. Was there any relationship between farmer age and the type of information they wanted?
That's an interesting question. In this one, we could potentially do the adoption analysis and figuring out whether age play a significant role. But in general, I think that in the current analysis, that whether you are a CRP participant or not seems to matter a lot. I did a separate study. I also saw a comment on female farmers. As I mentioned, this is that this unfortunately this is a typical survey. When you send to you get 80% of the respondents were male. And we did a women landowner survey, and we do see that by age, then the information, preferred information delivery channels vary a little, but only people who are above 80, for example, would want the binders, and most people actually, to our surprise, that many people chose to like both webinars and hard copy, like fact sheets, like smaller fact sheets. So in terms of the information, I think the age could potentially play a role, but we need to look. We need to see whether our data is large enough to pick that out. Yeah.
There was somebody that asked about what you thought about using eminent domain for wetlands.
Well, that seems to be a Kristen Tigran question, but I think if you're thinking about, we were looking into there's a recent Supreme Court ruling that examined WOTUS, right? So some of the wetland that are ephemeral wetlands are no longer protected through Clean Water Act. And there are already discussions that there's a possibility for more rows of private land trust and conservation easement in thinking about if there are certain habitats that is worth protecting. But yeah.
Jackie brought up that there were maybe some problematic issues with the video, the length of the video, and lack of B-roll. I'm going to say it might have been one of the participants, which is me. But that in round 3, they're making some more kind of commercial style videos that might be a little bit more upbeat and keep people's attention span.
Right, and I also want to comment on that. Remember that the first round of the survey is still 2022. I think we still have some restriction on what we can do or not in terms of getting the B-roll in the fields.
Right.
I think that we will have potentially better and shorter videos. That it's an interesting question. It's sort of a surprise to us. We anticipated higher response to the video messages.
Yeah, Jackie says shorter music and better B-roll. So maybe kind of in the interest of time, the last one here, were farmers concerned about the financial impact of losing productive land for edge of field practices?
Yeah, I think definitely that's part of the puzzle. And I also think that there's a possibility, if you're thinking about this is a new practice, but 5 years later there could be another one, then there's a potential rationale for you to wait, right? So there are certain elements of the inertia for the status quo also play into that. But overall, if you're looking at the land that is used for these practices, they are not as substantial, right? But now I'm in New York State, that in the context of renewable energy development, solar, right? So those are the losing land to solar is a much more major concern because you're talking about hundreds of acres.
Okay. There was a question that just came in on this one, Wendong, that percent employed, I guess.
Yeah, so this is we ask you about your job status, so full-time employment, part-time employment, and students and retired. So this is a percent employed is that self-reported that you are either in full-time or part-time employment somewhere. Yeah.
Okay, so could that include on the farm?
Yes. I think so, but yeah, let me double check. We also have variables on like years of farming and yes. Okay.
Okay.
That's a good question. So yeah.
Okay. So, and one thing I think for those of us, oh yeah, Jackie says she
Off
thinks
farm.
that's off-farm employment. So
Yeah.
yeah, okay. I think that one of the things, a major takeaway is there is a real need for more education around these edge of field practices. And so I think that's what this really shows to me. So yeah, that there's really a big need in this area, which is important for us to recognize, because sometimes at least somebody like myself thinks, well, we've been talking about this a while. Everybody understands what a wetland strategically sited for nitrate reduction or a bioreactor or saturated buffer is. But many people don't, because they're not living and breathing this every day. So I think that's really important for us to recognize. And I think that the work you've done is really pointing that out and will help us in how we do programs in the future. So with that, again, Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu if you need a CCA CEU. I want to thank Wendong for the work on this topic with his collaborators, Xiaolin and Dr. Comito. And Dr. Zhang, I'll give you the last word. I hope to see you back in Iowa sometime, for at least for a visit, and we miss you around here.
Yeah, definitely. I want to echo with an example quote we heard from the Iowa landowner survey, that when the service center people called the landowners and asked about tiles, and in the ag world we know this means tile drainage, but in many non-off-farm, non-operating landowners, they think you're talking about kitchen tiles or other things, right? So don't necessarily assume that you have, like, people know what you are talking about. And we also have statistics, for example, that for all the land that is rented out in Iowa, a quarter of the land have the landowner never visited the land that is rented out. Right, so they don't necessarily even know the crop yields, let alone the agile field practices. But we through a lot of us here at the webinar knows how important it is for people to appreciate and understand these practices, to accelerate the adoption of these important practices. So thank you again for your time and attention, and thanks a lot for your wonderful questions. And we will hope to share the round 3 results sometime maybe next year.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Wendong.